Get Ready with Tony Stewart podcast. I'm pleased to be joined today by David Seibel. Dave is the best-selling author, host of the Don't Run Out of Money TV show, and the managing partner of Aurora Financial Services. In this episode, we'll be discussing Dave's book, Don't Run Out of Money, his television show, and Dave's financial philosophy. Dave, welcome to Get Ready. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you and learning more about you and your work. So let's dive in. First question is about your origin story.
Sure.
Can you tell us about yourself and how you got started in personal finance?
Well, yeah, personal finance. I really started, I've been a finance guy my whole career. Spent the first 20-ish or so years working on the corporate side, working my way up through the ranks. Started as an accountant on Wall Street and ended as a chief financial officer of the international division for Sunbeam. Went down there to try to bail them out as part of a team. Didn't really work, but it was my last stop. Decided December 31st of 1999 was my last day in the corporate world. Decided at that point, a lot of different family reasons, things, had a young son. I was traveling way too much, part of the problems being international. But, so I was running a bunch of different businesses, after that. And, then we came to 2008. And as the world was imploding financially in 2008, I had a lot of friends and family calling me up and saying, what do I do? Pure panic out there. So, I was doing some consulting at the time for a friend of mine who was running a Guardian general agency. And he said to me one day, he goes, why don't you become a financial advisor? And I thought about it for a couple seconds and said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. I was running a hedge fund at the time, which we had totally automated. I had people working for me out in Chicago that were doing all the heavy lifting. So I just said, okay, let's do it. So I got into this business at probably the worst imaginable time, but, probably the most important time.
Definitely. Well, that was quite I guess, turbulent time is a good word for it around then.
To say the least.
But you bring a wealth of experience. I mean, from the corporate world to running a hedge fund, that kind of gives you a flavor of how things work at the financial services industry. And I think it's good because sometimes people come up and they only know the financial services industry. So they're rather limited in their, I guess, would you say, broader financial scope?
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a lot of different things that I like to talk about. And unfortunately in this business, a lot of what you get are salespeople. There's people selling product. And I think that's one of the things that causes a lot of the problems. And I try to take a different approach to it by looking at, instead of what's on the news and what's the hot stock and all these other things. It's what's the bigger picture and what should people really be concerned with and looking at and focusing on.
Definitely. I like that. The big picture is so important. And that's what I want to ask you next is about your financial philosophy. You mentioned that wealth management is much more than simply investing your money. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it's funny with this, we live in a Google anything time. So everybody's an expert on everything because they can kind of go to Google and look at it. And I call, in the book, I refer to it as, the big number versus the little number. And I think that part of the problems that we have is that everybody right now focuses on the big number. They focus on their account balance. They focus on, what do they have in their IRA and their 401k, and all they want is more money. So they look at the account balance, but believe it or not, when you sit down and you start really doing planning for why are we doing this, I started really looking at what I call the small number, because what's important, you could have a lot of money, but if you're spending more than that, and the small number being how much money do you need each month to live the life that you want to live, whether it's today or in retirement, I focus a lot on retirement income planning. Um, but the philosophy really is looking at the small number, because what good is having a lot of money if it's not enough because you're not looking at things realistically, and you've got, your expenses and debt and everything else is way out of whack, right? We have, I always talk about the calculators you can find online. So people punch numbers, punch a few numbers into these things, and they think they come up with an answer, yet it doesn't. Usually they don't make sense. So, really in a nutshell, I think my philosophy is not worrying so much about the account balance. Obviously that's important. Investing your assets properly is important, and I think we do that very well. um, but it's really focusing on the other things, focusing on your goals, focusing on what do you want your life to be in retirement, or really at any point in time.
Well, that's great. And I think maybe that comes from your outside perspective that uh, it sounds like you're encouraging. And I also feel that sometimes people need to ask different questions. Would you agree with that? That we're not asking the
Absolutely.
right questions always?
No, because what are the questions that people are asking, and what is the usual interaction with a financial guy is all about the markets. And
Mhm.
I always joke with people when I have people come into my office, prospects, new clients come into my office. I said, you got to be prepared for a totally different experience. Um, it's not that I don't care what the market's doing, but I we don't make decisions based on a point in time. And I always have a way of I'll walk up to the whiteboard in my office and I'll draw a long line, a timeline, and I'll make a small dot, and I'll say, okay, this is where we are. This is the beginning, and this is the end. Right? We can just picture
Mhm.
what that means. And you put a little dot on the board and you say, does it make sense to make a decision based on something that happens right now that's going to affect you for the long term?
Yes.
So it really is a matter of just thinking about it differently. And unfortunately, the average advisor, when you walk into their office, on the investment side, what do? They're going to talk about beating the market, whatever that means, right? Because that
Mhm.
that can mean a lot of different things. And you go in for your annual review, and I've spoke to people that do this. And what happens, if they beat the market, he's running around the room high-fiving you. And if he didn't beat the market, he's talking about things like volatility or politics or China or aliens landing somewhere. But there's always going to be an excuse, and either way, they get you to leave the office. Maybe give you some nice warm chocolate chip cookies or something, and you're going to feel like, okay, we can hang with this guy for another year. But again, getting back to what I said before, all along you're missing the point. It's not just about, as I always say, you're not going to be successful because of rate of return.
That's great. It makes me think about it. And I don't remember if this is a Benjamin Graham book, but with the theory of Mr. Market and how your partner is Mr. Market, and some days he comes in and he's in a good mood. Do you recall that?
I think I know what you're talking about, but yeah, it's, you know, you can't, I always tell the story that, the market gets people crazy. And I had a friend once upon a time, still a friend, but just this goes back a while. And, I think it was back during the dot-com days when that was just a long extended period of time of, agita, if you, if you will,
Mhm.
where, every day, once we got into 2000, the market just kept going down, and, occasionally you get good days. But he would get really depressed when the market was down. There was
Mhm.
only one problem. He didn't have any money invested in the market. And this is just one of those things where this is what it does to people. And, it's like today, everybody's, what's the greatest financial advice you can give somebody today? And I say that, sarcastically, because I've heard it so many times. buy Tesla,
Hmm.
or Apple or Google, Alphabet or half a dozen other stocks. But, one of the things is we have a very short memory, and people forget that every time we get into something like this, the other shoe drops. We want to make sure that the focus is not on the market, but on what happens, because we know the market's going to go up and down. So if everything you're doing is based on the market and you're ignoring everything else, that's a ride. I mean, do you really want that type of tension, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, at any point in your life? But certainly when you're retired and your income is now gone away.
Definitely. No, I mean, that's so important. I think so many people do focus on the market, and the market is just, it's going to do what it's going to do. And sometimes it defies logic with the market movements. And I think this is a good segue to talk a little bit about your book. What is your book, Don't Run Out of Money, about?
Well, on the surface, it's a book on retirement income planning. So, in short, people focus on growing their assets in, people call that the accumulation phase. So when you're younger, you're just growing your assets. You're not worried about what's going to come later. But when you get into retirement, it really does matter how you take your money. So the book, on the surface, the book goes into things like how to do planning and some of the problems with, some of the ways that people do things. And it really is just a framework for how to deal with advisors and how to pick an advisor and things like that, but also kind of giving a broad understanding of the subject matter. So if you go in and work with an advisor, you are at an equal footing, and you understand the process or what the process should be. Really, what the book is about, though, is there's so many things, and this is kind of one of the reasons I wrote it. But there's so many things that I heard getting into this business that I refer to people in the book, as bobbleheads, because there's so many things that I'll say to somebody just to get a reaction, and they'll just nod their head, like, oh, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. Yeah, yeah. Well, no, not necessarily, and not if I do my job, right? We don't want that to be a goal of being in a lower tax bracket. Well, yeah, I mean, we do tax planning, things like that, but you shouldn't be planning on having less. You should be planning on having more if you're doing it right. But the point is that there's so many things that we've heard over the years that we just take for granted. you know, defer taxes until you retire because you'll be in a lower tax bracket. Well, that's a problem. Bonds and stocks move in opposite directions. So one is a hedge against the other. Not necessarily. Things like the rules of thumb, the rule of 100, which says that, if you subtract your age from 100, that's your split of stocks and bonds, and all sorts of things like that. The rules of thumb, which we accept. And actually, there's a ton of advisors out there that manage people's wealth and do their planning based on these rules. And they're just a bunch of junk when you really do the math and get into them, and the amount of risk that people take on and put themselves under is just unwarranted and dangerous.
Yep.
So that's really why that's the main, I guess, theme of the book when I kind of get right down to it.
Well, that's great. And I think that's so important for people to realize that there is no real set rule in it. Reminds me of something I read recently about the BMI index that's now used widely through the medical field, that it was just
Yes.
something put together for an advertising campaign, and
I
it's
did
not
not
based
know
in
that.
any science or
Oh, that's
anything.
fantastic. There's so many things like that. You're right. I did not know that one, though. That's good.
Yeah, I read that and I'm like, boy, that sounds like just so much of what you're talking about is like, yeah, some of that, and also the 4% withdrawal rule is like,
Yes,
well,
that's
is
one
that
of my
really?
favorites
Yeah,
because, the person that wrote that did it at a time, and they don't realize that I think the title of the article was Safe Withdrawal Rates Based on Historical Returns. Well, if you just look at that, you should know there's a problem. But
Mhm.
when you do the math and you look at what rates were back when this was being written and what they are now, it's tough. And it's funny, Tony, because one of the things I always ask when I see somebody, an advisor that talks about that, is I always ask them, have you read the article? Because you think if you're basing your what you do in financial planning, you're basing your strategy on this article, or on this theory, or whatever you want to call it, that you would have at least read it and understand what it means. I have not met one person who has actually read the article.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm not surprised. I come out of the life insurance industry, and when you were talking about interest rates, is my focus was really on consulting and litigation consulting, but really
Mm-hmm.
deconstructing life insurance illustrations and contracts. And it was the same thing as I'd get in there, and most insurance agents didn't really understand what they were selling,
No,
and let alone their clients understanding what they were buying.
no.
But the same type of thing.
Yes, exactly. And that's, it's one of those things where in this business, and getting back to the bobbleheads, is that you find all the time that people don't want to ask the questions. I mean, some of this stuff is very complex. You get into different products, especially when you get into annuities, or structuring life insurance. When you talk about that, it can get very, very complex. Now, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you need to understand it. And you get people that just sit there and they won't ask the question for whatever reason, because I think it's because people think that there's so much information out there that they should understand this. They should
Hmm.
understand investing. They should understand these products, and they're almost embarrassed to ask the question. Um, I have a policy of forcing the question, because I don't want to do anything if people don't understand it, because it's going to come back to bite everybody in the butt later on.
That's great. I think that's so important. You really hit on it, is that I think so much of it is about financial literacy. I mean, that's
Yes.
really at the core of it. And then people don't wanting to seem like they don't understand,
Hmm.
even though nobody's ever taught this stuff anywhere. It's not part of our high school or college curriculum. So,
Yeah. Somebody explain that to me.
yeah, that's a big issue. That's a big issue. So, I always like to ask this question, is what inspired you to write Don't Run Out of Money?
Well, I'd like to say that there was something, some higher purpose or something like that. But, it goes to one of my philosophies in life, which is never make a decision with a beer in your hand. Uh, and this kind of fell into that category. I had written an article that was on foxbusiness.com. I think it was 2014, maybe. And it was really my philosophy. It was a lot of the things in the book, just in a nutshell. Talking about the rules of thumb and talking about some other things. And it was a bit of a rant. It was just something I put together. Um, but it was pretty well received, a lot of positive comments. And, I was at one of these things, that advisors are forced to go to, sitting around one night, having some cocktails, and a bunch of people who had read the article, were, said, you should write a book. Well, so 20 minutes later, I'm putting my foot in my mouth saying, that's a great idea. I think I'll write a book. Well, now once you put it out there, and you say it a few times, I remember reading something, and I can't remember where it was, but somebody put this article together on what to beware of an advisor. And, they say, beware of the advisor that's always talking about writing a book, or saying he's writing a book and somehow never does. So after a while, it just became, okay, I've got to write this. I've got to get this done. So after a few, fits and starts and restarts and other things, I finally, over the course of about a year, I guess it was, just got the thing written.
Well, that's great. Yeah, writing a book is definitely a labor of love, but I think it's a great way of expressing your philosophy and putting it down on paper. I think, did it help refine the philosophy for you and in your work with clients?
Uh, it does. I think what it does is it kind of institutionalizes what the process is. And it's been good. It's funny, we've sold a bunch of books. It's fun that, every month or whatever it is, you get your little checks from Amazon. But we've probably given away 2, 3 times as many. And it's been really a good thing for us to give it to a prospect, and they come in and read the book and they know what the process is. So it makes it a lot easier. They know the important questions to ask. They know what to expect. So I kind of look at it, it's almost like a user's manual for doing your retirement planning.
Well, that's
And it's been good.
Well, that's great. And I think that's something you hit on something I think that's important. And I think it also leads back to that informed consumer, that having prospects read that book before they meet with you, or let's say even another advisor, is that I
Hmm.
think that maybe that helps them to become the informed consumer where they start to ask the right questions.
Yes. Well,
And do
that
you
was
think
a
that's a
big
big
part of the book. Yeah, that was a big part of the book, and even in the appendix, I put a list of, I think, a dozen questions to ask your advisor, because, as you know, Tony, in this business, and some of the rules are changing this, but everybody calls themselves a financial advisor. But what does that mean? So, are you an investment advisor? Are you a stock broker? Registered representative? Are you a life insurance only advisor? Are you doing comprehensive planning? What is it that you're doing, and what's your model? And too often people have no idea. They come across an advisor because he was doing a dinner seminar or some other prospecting method. And, they see a pitch and they go in and talk to them, and, that they end up working with this person without knowing exactly what it is they do, or even more importantly, don't do.
Yeah, that's important. That's something, also that I'm hoping to tease out as I'm going along here, is to help people understand the wide spectrum of people who may be giving you financial advice and
Yes.
the differences in compensation and how that might impact their recommendations. It's incredible, that spectrum.
Yeah, we have, I put a whole chapter early in the book. The title of the chapter is "Who's Your Guy?"
Hmm.
Because, everybody's got a guy, right? Whenever you ask
Yeah,
somebody, oh, I have a guy, you know, but for people to understand who their guy is and what their guy does and what their guy doesn't do and what products they sell and how they get paid and who they work for. Are they working for a company, or do they have a fiduciary responsibility to the people they're working for? That's a big difference. And most people just either assume or don't understand. And honestly, there's I think that's one of the big problems with the business, is it's not set up for the individual. It's set up for the advisor, and they can hide behind these things and they can do different things, and they can somehow sleep at night. I don't understand that one, but I guess you can justify anything in your own mind.
I think so. And I think even sometimes it's because I'm not even sure the advisors fully understand what they're doing. But
No, no, I think a lot of them have selling systems that they've been taught, and whatever little market niche they're in, some of them are, I've met some of these guys. Some of them are just excellent salespeople.
mhm,
um, it doesn't mean they're good advisors. It doesn't mean they're really helping the people that they're working with. It just means that they're really good salespeople.
exactly. And they could go sell something else. They just happen to be selling a financial service or product. And I think that's a key that the financial services industry really needs to confront is
Yes.
advisors need to actually be able to advise.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
but some of the
Or they need to be
companies,
upfront about what they do. I don't think
yeah,
there's a problem if somebody is, and in the book, real quick, I talk about the different types of investment advisors, right? Because just now, investment advisors are different. Okay, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the client, which means they work for the client, not for a company. It means a bunch of other things, but it's like the highest standard. But even inside of investment advisors, there's many types. There's the extremes. There are investment advisors that all they do is manage your portfolio. That's all they do. That's all they want to do. And oftentimes we have people come into our office because they feel that their advisor should be doing more for them. And I have to tell them, well, that's what they do. That's their business. And I kind of equate it to a doctor. When you're young, you go to a pediatrician.
mhm.
But the day you turn 18, well, they kick you out of the office because now you no longer need a pediatrician. You need something else. You have your general practitioner who you're with for a lot of years. And then when you get to be a certain age, then you're going to a doctor that's, specializes in older people. Well, it's the same thing with, I think in finance. I think that, you have people early on, you should just be worrying about returns and things like that. That's why they call it the accumulation phase. And yeah, if you have issues saving and stuff like that, you want to talk to somebody. But as we get into retirement income planning and things like that, it's a whole different world. There's some very good investment advisors out there that don't do what I do because we focus on planning. We want that to be a core. I don't think you can go into the next step in your life, in retirement without a real income plan. But there's a lot of guys that they just don't do that. They worry about investing, they worry about portfolios, and that's absolutely fine. It's just up to the individuals, the clients at that point in time to know that, okay, I love this guy, he's done well for us, but now I need to go to a different doctor.
Yeah, I think that's great. It made me think about, as you talked about general practitioners, is sometimes people may not even know that they're actually seeing a specialist
Yes,
rather than a GP.
right.
That it works a little bit differently as they may think their financial planner is that guy, where he's just a specialist, as you
Yes.
mentioned.
Yep.
Uh, and maybe that's a key differentiator. Wanted to get in a couple questions really about your TV show.
Sure.
I think that's really exciting. I had the honor of being on an episode last week, actually. So, can you tell us a little bit about your TV show, Don't Run Out of Money, and what it's about?
Sure. It's funny how things kind of developed. We started the TV show. I was asked to do it. I guess it was early in the year, and then COVID hit, so everything was pushed out, and we started it. I don't know, must have been October, I guess. And I really wanted it or visualized it at first about being, all the topics in the book and all the things I think about. And then you realize that you quickly run out of things that if you're doing a weekly TV show, or podcast or anything else that, you run out of topics quick, very quickly. So you need to kind of, you know, pivot around. And what we did is we said, you know what, there's all these things out there that people struggle with. We did 3 shows on college planning, FAFSA, and saving for college, and how to get your kids into college, and things like that. Because these are important financial decisions that affect people down the road. And, when we say don't run out of money, we mean don't run out of money. And we see it too often, people making bad financial decisions that lead to other things down the road. College is a perfect example. I come across people all the time that because they don't want little Johnny or little Susie to have to take any loans out, that they gut their retirement savings to pay for a college education. Not always the smartest financial move. So I just took the approach that, what, let's go out and find true experts, not salespeople, in who can come on and answer those questions, that we can take any financial question or, even pseudo financial question or, on the periphery, but things that are going to help people and that help people make informed, well thought out decisions instead of just what did they Google yesterday, or, an article that they saw that was from 3 years ago, but they just didn't, they just saw it yesterday and they think that it's the gospel.
Definitely. Well, I think you come back to a theme, and I love the theme. It's something I focus on is uh, informed, well thought out decisions that I think, as I always say, I think people spend more time looking for their next television than they do thinking about like the 401k open enrollment.
Right.
So it's incredible. So as we talk about this, how do you feel we can improve financial literacy?
Oh, we could spend hours talking about that one, Tony. But I think it's a couple things. Number one is I think they have to get it back into the schools where they're teaching this stuff, because unfortunately, at least from my experience where I live in New Jersey, it's not coming from the parents. I see kids with that don't think twice about, they're hungry, so they'll order a sandwich on, DoorDash or something, and end up paying, $25 for, a Big Mac.
Mm-hmm.
There's just there's no education, there's no thought. It doesn't seem to be coming from the parents, because it seems that parents just want to give the kids everything, which is, drives me crazy. So I really think it's got to start at home, and it's got to start at a young age, and it's got to be something that people really focus on. I always tell the story. I have a very good friend who became a client of mine, and they are I mean, these are people who are just financially well off. I don't want to say well off. I mean, they did well because they saved, and they always focused on the future, and they taught that to their kids. And one of the things they taught to their kids was, okay, you don't need all the money that you're going to get from the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, and everything. So the deal was that every time they got a gift, they could spend half of it, and half of it had to get invested. Well, these four kids are all in their, I guess, 20s and 30s now. And they all have well over six figures invested, both in combination of Roth accounts and just individual accounts, and just very, very good money habits. And this was taught to them by their parents. That's where it's got to come from. When you see it work, it's amazing. And here's four kids that are well set for life, because not only because they have a good head start, but because they have very good habits.
Yeah, and thinking about it myself, I think, because my father was a financial guy, CPA core, and that helped develop good money habits for myself. And I think that's something, people expected in the educational system, but it's also getting parents, because that's kids see their parents do certain things, and their parents are modeling certain behaviors.
Yes. Well, that's true. And everybody is so, today it just seems that so many people, their biggest concern is keeping up with the Joneses, driving, the newest, leasing a new car every 3 years or 2 years to make sure that they have the nicest car on the block, and making sure the kids have absolutely everything. And I know when we were young, we worked. We were always doing something. A day like today where there's snow on the ground, we'd be out shoveling snow and making money. Back then it might have been $5-10 for doing, somebody's walk-in driveway, but we had money in our pockets. We could go out and we were always thinking about making some money so that we had some money. And today it just doesn't seem like that's the case.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. I know in high school I had 2 jobs that I worked. It was like we worked. I don't know, maybe it's because I think our load in high school is probably not quite the same. Some of these kids experience.
Yeah.
But I think that is part of it is when you were 16, that was it. You went out and got a job. Granted, they weren't the greatest jobs, but everybody that I knew at 16 was working,
Yes, but
part-time
what did you
somewhere.
learn from those jobs that weren't that great? Think about all the jobs that you had going back, and I look at some of the jobs I had, and everything from delivering newspapers and pizzas to working in a machine shop, and just working outside, and just all these things that kids today, it just seems, won't do, or mommy and daddy won't let them do it. And I think that they miss the the benefit and the learning experience of having some tough jobs, having to get up, having to go to work, having to work hard in the summer. um, and I think that's something that I think we miss.
Definitely. I would agree. I think it is about the work ethic because these jobs you had to show up. You had to work the
Yes.
full time. There wasn't any mailing it in.
Right.
Uh, so no screens. You were on and you were working.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so to wrap up, this is my big wrap up question: is
Okay.
what is your number one tip on being financially prepared?
I can it could give you a lot of different things, but I think, what I tell people is don't be a bobblehead.
I love it.
Don't just sit there and shake your head. Don't, it's don't be afraid to ask for help. This we live in this do it yourself kind of world where you can Google anything. But and I know that there's a lot of people out there that say, well, you don't need an accountant, you can use TurboTax, and you don't need a financial advisor, you can use these online services, and you don't need this and you don't need that. But is that really makes sense? And in the book I use the example that the whole DIY thing. Let's look at the investment and financial planning side. Is there's so many mistakes that people can make that can be, financially fatal, that, is paying somebody for that just like you would pay to go to the doctor. I said, doing it yourself, does that make any more sense than, performing an appendectomy on yourself with nothing more than an X-Acto knife, a copy of Grey's Anatomy, and a subscription to WebMD? But that's the way people look at so many different topics, both financially and non-financial topics, that, well, I can Google it or I can look it up on YouTube. And I've spent a lot of years in the financial world. I think I have um, I'm fortunate that I've seen both sides of it. I've worked with companies that, where I've been part of, a group taking companies public. I've worked in distressed companies. I've worked in all manner of, different companies. I've handled pensions, done all this stuff. And now on the personal side, um, I know what's true and what's not true. And I know that most people, the information that you're getting online is going to cost you money. Having surrounding yourself, I guess, well, a good piece of advice is, if you want to act like you're wealthy, or you want to be wealthy, or whatever that means, right? You want to be successful. One of the things we always talk about is, it's your definition of success. It's not mine, for you. Well, act like the wealthy. Wealthy people are wealthy because they surround themselves with people that give them good advice because they're experts in their field. And don't be afraid to do that, because what you'll find, certainly in this business, is that when you dissect the products that people are buying, we get in a whole discussion on no load mutual funds and how expensive they really are, that paying a very good financial advisor to do comprehensive financial planning for you, and somebody that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of, and really get good advice from, is often no more expensive than doing it yourself. It's just One is transparent, where you see what you're paying, and one is not. Either way, you're paying it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important takeaway, is that at the end of the day, you're paying something for something. There is no free lunch. These big mutual fund companies aren't just offering these products because they're
Right.
nice guys.
Well, that's the new commercials. They talk about, no fee this and no fee that. And everybody like, oh, well, that's great. I'm going to do that. Well, does that really make the, and this is one of the things I always try to say, give it the smell test. Does that really make sense that they're doing this? And maybe there's no fee over here, but it's costing you something somewhere. And my experience with financial products is the less you see, the more you pay.
Oh, I like that advice more. The less you see, the more you pay.
Yeah. Transparency
Right?
is a good thing.
Yeah, I got to mark that down as I try to get some of those great quotes in the show notes. So, Dave, I am going to put all your URLs and social
Great.
media handles in there, but what is the best way for people to learn more about you and to get in touch?
Well, you know what? We're actually going through a process now of changing things. We're putting up the show page and everything else. We're actually going to create a membership site, which will be free for people, just to get people in on, for the shows and all the information there. So easiest way is just you can see our company page at www.agsaurora.com, and from there there'll be links to everything else. You can also go on, the TV show is on rvntv.tv, and you can go there and go to our page and see the most recent shows and get a schedule for when the shows are streaming live, I guess recorded, but when they stream them. Again, we'll have don'trunoutamoney.tv in the near future, which will have everything up there too.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a fantastic conversation.
My pleasure, Tony. I enjoyed it. Always enjoy talking to you.
Myself
and
as
with
well.
You. Yeah.
Definitely. So to everyone out there listening or watching, please remember to subscribe to the Get Ready with Tony Stewart podcast. Until next time.